So, okay. So I had to go back to some of my old things here to piece together how this thing works best. And so I simplified it. So let me show you the package.json. This is all that's in the package.json. Okay. I didn't even need to technically have the .env in here, but I kept it in here anyway. I removed a lot of stuff. The only thing that NodeMon is doing as a dev dependency is by installing it on a development system. What this will do is that as I'm actually changing files, this will automatically reload the server, so I don't have to manually do it every time.
Okay.
Okay, that's all NodeMon's doing. And so anyway, really, this,
when you say reload the server, it's reloading the server that's running on the same computer, I'm assuming.
yeah. So
Yeah,
like as
server.
I'm developing stuff, as I'm changing stuff in some of these files, it's watching these files for changes.
That makes it a whole lot easier because that simplifies. Yeah.
Yeah, and so NodeMon is a very nice tool to have for development. And so you'll even see I was doing stuff here to kind of solve problems, and it would say app crashed. But as soon as I had a change, as soon as I did a change, it would restart until I could actually get the listing on port 7777.
Got you.
Okay. So the main entrance way is index.js. So when I come in here, the only thing that I'm really adding is this .env, and I'm configuring it. And all this is doing is it's allowing me to use an environment. It's allowing me to use environment variables.
Okay, so you called it .env, but it actually refers to a .env file.
Right, and actually, it's the package itself is called .env.
Okay, so that's a nomenclature.
I didn't name it that.
I didn't make it
That's
up.
what it's called.
Right. Gotcha. That's a version you're using specified in the dependencies too. Okay.
Yep, you got it. So anyway, so when I come in here to index, all this is doing is it's creating the app from this app.js. It's importing the app.
Okay.
And it's creating it, and then it's going to listen on the port that's specified within the .env, or it'll then default to 3000.
Okay.
Right. And since I had the .env in here and I have it currently set to 7777, it's listening on port 7777.
Instead of 3000.
Right. Instead of 3000.
It's overriding it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, what it's doing is this is an OR happening here. So it's like, if this is not here,
right,
then do this type of thing.
So if it is there, then the default would be 3000.
Right. So within Artero, right, that's a sword, and it's basically a conditional. It's saying, if this is present, use it, and if not, then do this.
And so is the cup holding 3000 or 7777?
Right. Exactly. And this is part of that stuff that makes things like scalable, because you want it to come from the environment variables so that you can, like when I go to deploy something on Heroku, I can't even specify the port because they do all that for you. So you have to set this up to listen to the environment variable because the port's assigned by Heroku itself.
Okay.
Right. But for development purposes, I don't even need this .env, and it would just default to 3000. So that's kind of why that's there. So anyway, so you'll notice all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to listen on that port. I pass in the port. And then the second thing I'm going to do is I'm creating a little, what is called an anonymous function. That's what this little guy is. And it's, let's see here. So that's the anonymous function portion. So like to help you kind of simplify this even, what I'm going to do is just for a second, I'm going to copy this and then I'm going to take it out. Now I want you to see how it's just a simple function here, right? It's a simple function call happening, which is on this app. So it's a listen, and then I'm passing in a port, and then I'm going to also give it a function that is a anonymous function as a second parameter that's just going to spit out to the console listening on port yada yada. And that's why we see this down here.
Right. It's just
Okay.
it's just showing us in the terminal what's happening.
Exactly. And I could also, just so you know, like in here, I could pass in just like I could pass in things like what I'm doing here with port. I could pass in stuff to this function if I wanted to.
Okay.
Right here. So I could do like name. I could go name. And outside of this, I could go let name equal Doug. Right. And then I could go listening on port da da da, and then I could go name.
Hey, is that stuff that's popping up the add-on, or is that built into Visual Studio?
That's built into Visual Studio. Some of it though is Copilot happening.
Okay.
Sometimes it's Copilot, sometimes it's Visual. Sometimes it's one of the extensions of Visual Studio Code.
Do you think I should install Copilot?
I love Copilot.
I better install it then.
So the other was undefined. That's weird. It didn't pick up the name function. That's weird. I guess maybe I need to make it a const. Would that pick it up? No. So I can't even see it. Why? See, this is why I need to stay in JavaScript or one or the other to really keep it loaded in. But anyway, wow, that is weird. Huh. Because one is undefined and I don't get why. I wonder, no, I can't do that. Could I specify a default? And that might work. Okay, so at least when I just specified the default, it would work. But anyway, so it's probably just because it's inside that function. I don't know why I can't see name, but whatever. And we don't even need to worry about that anyway, because that's not part of the lesson. So we won't even worry about it. But anyway, there is ways. So that's all that's really happening there. Notice how it's always refreshing now. That's NodeMon at work.
So,
okay, so the next piece we need to look at is this app. Okay, so the app is literally here, and all we're going to do is we're just going to say the app is going to use JSON, so that way we can kind of set it up. We're then going to set up an actual API endpoint, and we're going to point it at the API root router.
okay.
Okay. And so that way everything is going to be inside of that. We're then going to handle our base, which is an app.get of just the base, not the base for the API, but just the base. And we're just going to say this. So if I now come over here to the ports, oops, come back over here. Let me go localhost 7777. You'll see that API active on port 7777, right? And that's just a normal response of status 200. It'll give it 200, okay. And then we're just gonna send it. And that's all we're doing. We're just sending a little bit of text and that's all that's happening.
What's the thing with the port 3300 all about? Constant port. Right above that.
Oh yeah. Actually, we don't even, oh, it's just because it has to pull in the port again. And so this would technically need to be this to work right, to be the same. And that's exactly why in general, I mean, like, how would you even want to do this? I'd almost put this into a configuration itself and then pull it in from index or app, because effectively you could end up with that little issue where this one, like if this was missing here, if this one was not here, this would actually be, this is the thing that's causing it to listen on 3000.
Mhm.
And so when I'm over here and I go and do this, it'll say 3,300, and it's still listening on port 3,000, right? So technically this could lead to a thing where it's like, we can't find your API at 3,300, right?
Well,
And it's because,
But,
makes
but
sense?
yeah, but the way it's set up now, it's not even using 3000 at all, right? It's doing 777
Right. It's using 7 because this is present.
present,
The
right?
trick is that the only reason why why this is even happening here is because it's showing what port it is. But really, in general, when I'm doing this, I just go API is active, and that's all I'll say. That's like it. That's all I really technically will say. And so I can even, oh, dang it. Let me just end this. There we go. So technically, this is how I usually do it. This was just because of how the thing, I pulled this in from my old Lambda stuff. So like, seriously, when I save this now, I don't even need the port in there. Like
Okay.
it was just a show. I still have it here. That's coming from the index.js
Right.
to the console. But now if I come over to here, it'll just say API is active, right? Because I don't need to tell it where the port is.
Right. You're obviously on the right port, so you don't need to re-announce
Right.
it in text. It's just
You got it.
more unnecessary code.
Right. And so anyway, so this is a pretty, you can see this is pretty simple, right? This is not too tricky. And by doing this use here, now I can go into this root router, and this is really where the magic's occurring, okay? Or where more magic can occur. Don't pay, this one's commented out, this little line right here is commented out, so don't worry about it yet. But anyway, you'll see here, I've pulled in Express again. I'm importing Express because I need it. And then I'm going to be using router. And so I'm going to pull in a router. That again, when I'm exporting this thing, it's now a router. That's how this thing knows to work. Right?
Right. Go back
And
to
another way that I could have done this is I could have gone const root router equals require root router. And then I can just kind of come here and go root router. And that'll be the exact same thing. So a little bit more simplified. I'm importing it. I sometimes shortcut where I'm just going to import it directly, like at the point in time where it's needed. And so then I'm not even creating a variable for it. But anyway, so making sense so far?
Yeah, I guess why would you want to do it the other way with a variable or whatever? The first way.
Well, in general, this is clean. This is a way where it's like if you're working with people and all that, it might be better to put all your imports up at the top and not have anything imported down below, because then they know just to go look at the top to find where that is.
Right. And it's, I guess part of it is having to do with, like, for something like this, for instructional purposes, simplifying is better, but it's just like commenting code and stuff. If you're going to make something to where you want to change a variable, you don't want to have to search and replace, you just want to change it in one spot or something.
Right. And so, and really that's the thing is like, let's say I needed to use this in multiple places. Then in general, I would do like an import here like this, and now I have access to this for the rest of this file. Because I might need to use it more than once, let's say, right? So anyway, so that's all that's happening there. And again, here is, in fact, actually I need to move this down to make that clear, because that's not an import. So that's actually creating the app, the Express app. And of course, over here, I'm just importing app. This is just kind of getting the server portion set up. And then this is actually the application itself, which is an Express application. which is once I've done this and I've created this app, this express package, it's what's allowing me to use these .uses and this .get.
Okay.
Okay. Makes sense?
Yeah, because if you don't define the app, then you can't use
Right.
the app or get the.
You got it.
Okay.
So here's an API. Like this is really what it is. It's just this app.get, and we're specifying it for the root. Okay, not for the API root, but for the actual root, because this here is going to be the root router for the API. And this is just when you go to the site, right? So just like when you go to a website, you could actually do stuff here where you actually send back HTML.
Right.
So I could even do this. I could go H1. I think this will work. H1, see if that changes anything. Boom.
Okay.
Okay. But in general, you don't want to see how it returns it with an H1 there.
Mm-hmm.
And literally all it did was it put it right in the body. You see that? It's all it did. See how it's doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, let me try to expand that. There we go. Much easier to see, right?
So when you're pulling up the root, you're actually just pulling up a web page. It's going over HTTP.
You got it. Right? And so this thing here is sending just kind of a text back, but it knows how to handle the H1. The browser does. So I could build up web pages here just using Express. I could use Express to actually serve web pages.
And you wouldn't actually put the content of the web pages there. You would just make files for them, I guess, and call the files.
Right. And that was kind of how that Express generator was working. But we're just going to be using JSON for the most part. So we don't need to, because, and this is part of that whole this WordPress style too. Because WordPress, remember how it has a REST API?
Right.
Okay. That's all this is doing. It's just its form of this. It's just with PHP and its form of it, instead of it being a Node/Express, it's a WordPress API.
Now, so going back to like APIs, so a WordPress API is an API that's built in PHP.
Right, because WordPress is built in PHP.
Right, but this API is built in JavaScript.
Right.
APIs built in different languages can still cross-communicate, I guess.
Right, because all they're going to be doing is just calling the URLs.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So it's a way for applications to communicate with each other across a network.
So, but it does more than just call up URLs. Like it can call up specific data sets or points based on, I don't know. See, that's the part I don't get.
In order to do that, the whole thing, the first thing to really understand is that you have a route, right? Like an actual URL route. Right. And then that causes a request response to happen. That's why these two things are passed in here to this function. Okay. And so the response is what we're sending back. Okay. And so it's like, I don't know if I'm going to answer that right. Say what you were saying again.
Well, because what I see here is it's like pulling up a directory is different than, say, authenticating a user or just specific information, that.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. And
like,
so now, and that's just because of the
database.
different styles of what you can do with these endpoints.
Because
So
you have to have a way of how you communicate. What are the fields of data that we're communicating over?
Yep, absolutely. And so that's where we get into the difference. That's where we get into CRUD. Okay.
Right.
Yep, CRUD. You ever heard of it?
No.
Okay.
What kind of crud is this?
CRUD actually is a database term, which is a moniker. It's CRUD, and it means create, read, update, delete.
Okay.
Okay. It's because predominantly most of what you're going to be doing with your base sort of data structures is you're going to be creating elements within it. You're going to be wanting to read elements. You're going to be wanting to update some of those elements sometimes, like an element, and then you're going to want to delete them. Like you're going to need to be able to delete elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so an endpoint, so think of this API, even though I'm calling it an endpoint, it's kind of the meta endpoint for the whole API structure.
Mm-hmm.
And this right here is the route to just the site itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a good thing to kind of capture that, because see, if I don't have this here, so like, let me comment this out real quick. So if I comment this out, when I go to refresh this, cannot get this, right? I can't get that route. And it doesn't cause an error. It's just saying, cannot get this route.
There's nothing for you there to get.
Yeah. And so sometimes it's easier to just have at least a root route that's under a get. And now I can at least say, hey, the API is active. You can hit it, right? So now I can go to the API. So now I'm just going to hit the API. See how all I had to do was that?
Yeah.
Okay. And now I can see the API is active as well, but now it's in JSON format.
Okay.
Because the API needs to just be JSON format. And when you're doing headless, that's exactly what you're doing, because it's going to be a whole other front end, React, Vue, Angular, whatever. And you're going to be basically pulling in JSON to populate the front end. You can also use XML. That's where like SOAP requests come from and a bunch of other stuff. And SOAP is a little bit more integrated. It's a trickier thing. But effectively it's still the same. It just has some more stuff to it. Whereas JSON's just there for lightweight data passing. That's all it is.
Okay, so let me clarify something. This is all built on using Node.js, right?
Yep. But you can use Python. You can use Spring Boot.
If we were to use Python, then all the characters I see here and the syntax and everything changes. The commands, everything changes, I'm assuming.
Yeah. But in general, it'll still look the same. Django is a little bit different, but like, let me show you Fast API, for instance, which is the newest Python thing on the scene that allows for asynchronous, which Flask may have a way of doing async, but it doesn't do it right out the gate, and nor does Django. And so anyway, so you can kind of see here, let's go into the tutorial. So first steps. So here we are. See how this is so similar looking? Look at this. We're just going to import Fast API, just like we did with Express. This is just Python code. Notice how similar looking it is right now, right? But in this case, instead of doing Express, we're going to do Fast API, and we're going to save that into app. Make sense?
Okay, so wait, are these commands we're typing, or are we creating files with the first?
This is a file. This will be in a file. This is literally, you see how we did this right here?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing we did was we imported Express, right?
Okay.
Well, over here in our file, we're going to import Fast API.
Okay.
That's just a Python way of importing. And so this is called Fast API, not Express, because it's Python. The second thing we did beyond this root router thing was const app equals express. The second thing we do here, we create our app, and instead of it being express, it's fast API.
Right.
Okay. Then you'll see a little bit of difference here, right? So this one here is doing an app get, which is exactly the same. But notice this is like a function, whereas this one is called a, so this is actually the function right here, and we're going to call that function root. So this is a Python way of doing it. Define function, that's what that means. So like a definition for a function called root. And we're just going to return some JSON here with the message of hello world. This is specifying it is asynchronous, so that way it doesn't tie up other stuff. It can run in its own little, like its own little thread or its own little process. So it's not blocking anything. And this right here is called a decorator. It's a pretty popular style of doing these sorts of things. Express isn't using a decorator here. It's literally going and doing just a straight up function, whereas this doesn't have any parameters, right? This one here, this get is actually the function, and it's going to pass in the route, like the route to this particular function handler. And this is the function handler. Okay, so see how similar the two are?
Yeah. It's so basically they're doing the same things. They're just the nomenclature and syntax is different, I guess, mainly.
Right. And the key thing is
some differences in how it works. I'm just, straight.
Yep. And the key thing is the reason why these things are allowed to talk to each other is because they're all following the JSON protocol.
Right. Because it's returning the requests in JSON format.
Mm-hmm. And you can also pass data to one of these things using JSON.
Wait, say that again?
You can also pass data into, so like this is a get, and this is where we were kind of getting into the CRUD stuff. So let's go CRUD and HTTP methods for RESTful services. So here's the create, so here's the read. See this right here? Yeah. So we've got CRUD, create, read, update. This is modify and replace, and then this is delete. So there's a couple of different styles here. So anyway, when we're doing a read, which is all that's happening here, that's why we're just getting some data back. So It's just saying API is active. We're just doing a read to that endpoint right now, right? So we're just doing a get request. That's why you see here, get.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa, that's weird. How did that get in? Oh, I added a space. And here, I didn't even need to specify this because it'll automatically return the status of 200. I could have kept it, but I got into the habit of always specifying what my status was so I could just easily see it. It was just something I got into the habit of doing. Here, I didn't even do it, so I wasn't even being consistent. I could do like a status here of, did I have the quotes around it? I think I did. Let's go 200, 200, and then let's go boop, and then we could go JSON. So that's a more clear way of sort of saying, I wanted to return a status of 200, and that's what I want, right? And so there's the API and it's active, but now I'm passing JSON. Notice that's what I'm doing.
So if we went back to that page, would it change what appears there?
No, in this case, I didn't do anything enough different. I would have to type something in here. This was already a status of 200 when it returned, but it's just kind of but it still did restart the server because it recognized file changes. So like if I come back over to,
because that's the localhost 3000/API, right? Yeah, that one.
7777 in this case, but yeah, see how nothing changed?
Yeah, nothing changed.
But I could like, I could literally go like, right?
Mhm.
And now if I refresh, that's what's coming in.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. So then, and so the fundamental things first that you just need to understand is that each endpoint has a route. So when you're building an API, you need to say, here's the route. Now I want you to notice here that is nothing in, I want to take this out so bad. I'm going to take this out because it's just confusing things. So notice there's nothing here, right? And yet this actually is responding to API. Do you know why?
Mm-mm.
It's because I already, and this is something that Express does, this is something that you'll get into like with Fast API, a lot of these now do it. And what it is that because when I imported or when I used this root router, I gave it the route of API here.
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay. So I could even go into here, for instance, and I could create a new GET request, but I could say, Doug, right? And I could say, let me actually do this real quick. I'll take that out. Okay, there we go. Let me take that out. Now let me come into here. And again, we're just going to do a read in this particular case. But instead of this base route of API, I'm going to go Doug. And then I'm going to go 200. I'm going to go, this is your endpoint, Doug, right? So now if I come over here, nothing is other than the fact that I changed the whatever. But now what I could do is I could go Doug.
Ah, okay.
See?
So everything, all the endpoints are going to be as subdirectories of the API master.
Right. And Django doesn't quite work this way, just so you know, but a lot of the modern ones like Express, Django again was set up kind of like around WordPress time. And so it was set up with that whole kind of like full end, front end, back end system all together. And so it had and so you still specify the routes, but it was a little bit different how it did it. And so they ended up settling on this style later. And so you'll see this like a lot with like Fast API. I think Flask uses it. I believe Spring Boot with Java uses it. I think .NET services should work this way. It might not, but it should. I believe Laravel works this way, although it's been a long time since I've seen Laravel. Laravel is PHP style, you know, so just kind of know it's a neat little way of immediately sort of, so it's like, yeah, I've created the API endpoint, but now inside of that, I've created a Doug endpoint.
Hey, how can I have a copy of the files you just made? What's the easiest way to do that?
I'll make sure it gets pushed up to GitHub and you have access.
Okay, so you can push it to GitHub and I can just pull it or fork it or something.
Yep. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a post here. I'm going to do it to your endpoint. Okay. So I'm going to do a post request to your endpoint. And what I'm going to do, how much time do we have left on this? Oh yeah, we're doing okay. So what I'm going to do is I want to come back into here and I'm going to literally go to the API. Nope. Let me go back up here to the, was it the sprint challenge that I did that under? I think that's what that was. Come on. API. Nope, that's not where I did it. Where did I do it? This might have been it. Nope. Why did I do that? Was this it? No, that was not it. Where did I have that note thing? What did I just pull this from? I just had it. So where did I pull it from? Server testing? Maybe it's here? Nope. That's funny. Where did I have that thing? Oh, back in project week. That's right. So anyway, so what I'm going to do real quick here is I just want to kind of show you this. So inside of here, I'm going to do this little guy. So this right here is going to be some data coming in from the body of the request. Okay. And I'm going to console log data. Okay. Then what I'll do is I'll just return a status of 200 to say like whatever. And I'll be like, and I'll just say, okay, Doug, right? Something like that.
Okay.
And so I'm going to save this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a different way, because when we're doing to make a call, because when we're going through our web browser, we're rather limited, right? I'm largely just reading data. If I'm going to start using the web browser to interact with these endpoints, it's usually because of a form that's going to be on this page. Make sense?
Yeah.
And so you remember how you said, I don't even know what Postman is?
Right.
I'm about to show you Postman.
Or
Postman is a way of actually making URL calls for testing your API. Okay. So I'm just going to come here. I want to save that guy. Let's just close all of these out. Okay. And what I'm going to do you want to start a new one so I can, let's start one more. Start one more, and that way I can finish then, because we're finally rolling. I think you're finally starting to get it. Okay.
All right.
Cool. Let me come back on into here. Okay. So what we're going to do is we've got these endpoints now. Okay. And we are, and what we're going to do is we're going to use Postman to test it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this. I can just go HTTP localhost, and we're going to go 7777. So right here, I could already hit this endpoint if I want to. It's going to give me the API is active.
Okay.
And notice that in the headers, what is returned is text, right? And that's because when we did this inside this index or inside this app, we sent it just as text. We did a send. And so it's just sending that as text, right?
Right. But the time we put the H1 tag in there, it did not include some other HTML basic, like body.
The browser can handle a text. It can handle text and it'll convert it.
The browser's just
so if I do this and then I hit it again, it's still just going to show us text. And that's what, it says text HTML. See that?
Yeah.
Okay. So did it change? I think it might have, because maybe it was already the same, but it's just kind of handling it as a text file. So yeah, text HTML. See?
Mm.
And so that's all that's happening there. And notice it's coming back with a body, right? And that's that API is active. And there we go, right? Now, the next endpoint I can hit is I can go API, right? Which we wanted to check as well. Right. In this case, it's returning as JSON. I can see that because now it's going to go as application JSON in the header, in the headers, right? And what is returned in the body is an actual JSON object.
And what's the normal syntax for JSON? Like right now we see quotes API, then colon, quote active. The the first thing is different than the second thing. It's
Right, because the first what do you mean the first thing? The other one when I
no,
would say
no, API is describing it's these are not like two just data fields in a set or something. You know what I'm saying? A list of same typed objects.
right, and so that's just a thing of kind of like going and doing this. So JSON W3 schools. And this is a good introduction to JSON sort of stuff here.
Okay,
so
that's
JSON stands for
yeah.
JavaScript Object Notation. It is a text format for storing and transporting data. And so everything generally within JSON is key value pairs. It's like a dictionary or a hash map or something like that. And so in this case, we have a name of John, that's a key value, age of 30, key value, and then car null, key value. Okay.
Oh.
There's one other thing to JSON that you can do though, which is that you can also pass lists. And so lists will be, or arrays as they call them. Arrays are going to look like this. Right? So they're going to have this syntax to them. So I could even go into, let me go into the root router here. And I'm going to go and I'm going to say, and instead of passing, how do I want to, yeah, I don't need that to be API. I'm going to go message here. Actually, oops, let me get rid of that. Message. And this will kind of confuse you, but I'll explain it. Because let's see here. So we're going to go message. Now, what I'm going to do though, is I'm going to specify, and instead of actually doing a message here, well, I'm going to show you this because there's a couple ways of doing it. Okay. Because arrays and objects work together. So JavaScript objects, JavaScript arrays, they work together because an object is effectively a set of key value pairs, and an array is a list of stuff, because sometimes you do need a list. And so you need the ability to sort of cycle, like loop over that list. That's how like literally all of those Facebook posts come across, is they come across in a list. And then on the front end, it just takes that JavaScript and loops through all of it and displays all the posts.
Okay.
Makes sense? And
okay.
Each individual post is an object. So let me just actually go and I'll do it the way that it'll oftentimes be. So instead of doing the way we know that it's an object is that it's got those little squiggly braces, right? The curlies. You see that?
Squiggly.
Yeah. So like you see here, you see how this is a squiggly?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. But an array is going to be the square brackets.
Got you.
Okay. And so I can go and I can do like, I could do a message of hello, or let's go hello, Doug, right? And then I could do a, let's see here, let's go with a, yeah, we'll just call this one O, I guess. And it's just to represent an object. And we can create an object in here, and we're gonna go message, and we're gonna go like that. And so we'll do we'll do it like that. Okay. And I need to make that a, what do I need to do? Is that? Something's up. What is wrong with my syntax here? It's probably because, weird. Why? That's exactly the same. Oh, that's because of that. That's right. So let me take this out. And let me take this out because it's an array. Duh. Okay. So there we go. Duh, Eric. Okay. So let me save that. Now when I hit the Doug endpoint, although that's under the post. So when I hit the Doug endpoint, so first I'm going to go and just hit the Doug endpoint under the get, so you can see that come through. So this is your endpoint, Doug. That's up here. That's the get. You see it?
Yeah.
But now we're going to do a post. Okay. So we're going to do a little something different. So in the post, what we're going to do is we're going to change this to post. Okay. So I'm going to send, and it still works. It's just that the body that I sent there was nothing in the body. And we know that because we literally got this back and it's, oh, okay. That's deprecated. Cool. And we know that because what we got back was nothing from here. Like we went and displayed it.
I get what you're saying.
But there was nothing there yet. Okay.
Right, okay.
And so, but we did get stuff back. And in this case, we got square brackets back, which means it's a list. And in this case, one of the first item is a string that says hello, Doug. And the second is an object that includes a one key value pair that is a message, hello, Eric.
I'm a little confused about the difference between getting and posting. Look, I know you use a GET request to retrieve documents from a server, but in a post request, aren't you sending something?
Mm-hmm.
And
what haven't set it up yet. I was just showing you that you can use a post request to still get data back.
Yeah, gotcha.
So this is how you'd still,
you still get a response, even though you didn't get something. You posted something, you're still getting a response back.
Right. And usually what happens is you're going to want to send something back in the response that sometimes it literally just returns the status of 200 or 201, and that's it.
And so right? Like in your Postman program there, is that a field for key or key value? Is that what would be? Can you switch to that screen?
Yeah.
So right there, it says query parameters, key. If you like key and value, that's what you'd be posting, I guess, if you put something in there. But there's no
right.
There's no
code parameters are a little different. Let me show you exactly what
there's no code on the other end to receive this, or right? I guess.
Do you see what's happening here?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So do you see how that changed that up here? That's query parameters.
Dude, I've always wondered about that. Okay.
Right.
So what is it? What is it? A question mark and then it equals. Okay. So
okay. So I'll get into that here in a second. Okay. But I don't want to, I'll get into the query parameters first. But what I want to show you first is, it's just, okay. Well, what I want to show you first here is that now we can go into the post. We can go into the body of that post. Okay. This is now like from a front end, it's going to call, or it's whatever application is going to call into this endpoint. Okay. And so you remember here, we're actually going to get the body from the request that comes in.
Okay.
Okay. This is how we're going to populate that body from that other side.
Got you.
Okay. So,
because you're on a body thing now. How could I was trying to figure out what change you're on?
Yeah, what it is you'll see here, there's like this post, and then you have the endpoint, and then there's these different things down here. This is when you need authorization stuff.
Because we're set authorization. Right now we're permissionless.
Right. Exactly. We're just wide open, except for it's all local. And there's no core set up, and
there's no way someone can hit it because there's no IP forwarding or whatever going on.
Got it. And then there's this automatic header stuff that gets sent into the request itself. So let me go and do this. Let me go express console log request headers. so I can see exactly how we do this. Okay. I think that's it. Let's just see if this works. So like
basically,
if
it's
I
just
go console log request headers. Okay. And the only reason why I have access to a request here is because see this router that's set up here. Okay, when I did this, it has access to these functions get and post. And so the second parameter, the first parameter is the route or the URL, the endpoint sort of thing as we're building that. But the second thing is a function that has a request and a response object already built in. And so when this endpoint is hit by some other service, by a front end or whatever, it's automatically going to create a request and a response. The request is what literally comes in from that actual other thing.
the string after the question mark, or excuse me.
It's not after the you can get access to those as well. We'll get into that. Okay. But for now, what I first want you to see is I want you to see these request headers, because every single request and response has headers and a body.
Okay.
Okay. And that's a
Every
standard
single has
thing.
request. Okay.
And you'll even see that within HTML, right? Because HTML further, it's a really funky thing because it's like when you really get into a website,
Yeah,
what happens is you
it has the head section and the body section, right? Is that what you're referring to?
well, yeah, but let me get a little bit further for you because it gets really kind of tricky. Because it's a pretty common thing for all the way down the whole sort of network stack, that what you'll have is when you get down to the packet level, you still end up with basically a header and a body.
Oh, it's fractal. It's a repeating pattern.
Yeah, it's just everybody ends up using it because the headers gives you kind of the metadata stuff,
Right,
and
right,
then you have the
right.
body, which is the data.
Right. It's sort of like it tells you the file format and structure kind of information.
Right. And so that's literally at a low level packet sort of.
Okay, so you're talking about, okay, gotcha.
Yep. But then you can also go all the way up and you end up with this thing, which is that when you go to make a request for a URL for a page, for a web page, what comes back is literally you make a request and you have some headers attached. Sometimes in those headers is your authentication. And then you'll have some stuff sometimes in the body if you're doing a post or a put or something like that. And then what will happen, because like you don't need anything in the body. So it's literally just going to say, I want this. It'll send with the headers. It'll send with an empty body. And then the response will return with what you're asking for.
Okay, and so let me clarify something. So the reason that we can be doing this router command with this request response is because we've required or enabled the express, I guess, library and an assigned router to use the express.router. Are those like JavaScript libraries or something, or what's the nomenclature?
Yep, Express is written in JavaScript and it handles all that for you.
So basically, we're just depending on these pre-existing libraries so we can code in a way that's more efficient than having to build all the pieces and parts of what's happening. Okay, gotcha.
You got it. And so it's like, and again, Python has Flask, Django, Fast API, Java has Spring Boot and others. That's what you can do with Tomcat. That was also Java servlets, things like that. C# has its .NET REST API, I think. PHP has Laravel that does it for you, right? It's just, it's all that stuff.
So anyway, WordPress is a Laravel type deal, probably.
Well, no, yeah, it does it itself though.
Right, okay, got you. It doesn't need a development framework.
Right. Laravel is kind of like its own thing. You don't really, it's its own thing. It's just another way of, it's a way for PHP to do this type of stuff that we're doing right here. WordPress is all baked into WordPress.
Right.
So anyway, so we have a request and a response. So now I'm going to console log the headers here as well. So when I come in here, let me make sure I save that. Make sure I save that. Oh, I see I didn't. Okay. And now when I come in here to Postman, and I'm going to be doing the post again. So now I can send, but when I come back over here, see all these little headers that came across?
Yeah.
Okay. And you know where, and you know what? If we look at all of this here, we look at all of this, that's what's in here.
And now, what happens if we do the same thing, or can we do the same thing through the browser and not through Postman? And what will be the result?
Yeah, we can. We can't do it with the post. I mean, there's extensions that'll allow you to do it, but effectively it's still there.
Okay.
Okay. So I could even go up here and I'll just do like the little thing here so you can kind of see it. I'll hit the Doug endpoint from the actual, the get request Doug.
There you go.
Okay. So you can see it.
Because will that pull in like
So-
your browser version and all that garbage?
Yep. And so what I'm going to do is we're already at this endpoint. So I'm just going to refresh. This stayed basically the same,
Right.
but now here's actually the all the headers that come from the browser.
Yes, yes, yes.
See that? Little bit more.
Okay. Which, does it say anything about language there? Just out of curiosity.
It's got text HTML. It's got that type of stuff, but it doesn't say language because you don't need to know that.
Okay.
Right? It's just the protocols that are in place now for basically things to communicate over a network. So it's going to be agnostic. You could have a JavaScript, you know, a Node Express thing that's calling, like at times it may need resources. In fact, it's pretty common. Third-party APIs are involved. And so you'll be pulling from like weather data.
I have
So
an off-topic question that I'm sort of curious about because it's related to my interest in all this. You know how when you open a web page and it automatically detects what language it should parse to you sometimes? Like you have, maybe you haven't been to it before, or you have, or I don't know. I was just wondering, like, is there ways that systems in place where they like geolocate your location and then based on your IP address they try to serve up? Because I noticed that in Tor browser when I'm just popping up from a false location somewhere else or VPN, I often start, like if I with no cookies, and then Google parses to me the language of the apparent location that it thinks I'm in. And I'm wondering if the same thing probably happens with APIs or not. I don't know if it's.
It can. It just depends upon how much it's wanting to delve into the headers, because that stuff is passed through a lot of times through the headers. So actually sometimes it's even lower than the headers, because see, it's really weird, because it's like stuff gets wrapped. So of all things, think of it like this: a packet at the lowest level is a packet, and that's how things are sent. And usually it takes more than one packet to get the data across.
Right.
So the packet will have like a header, and it'll have some headers, and it'll say like 1 of 7 or something like that, right? Is one of the metadata things. And then it like literally gives the segment of that body for that. And so it's like, but the headers at a packet level is going to give you a lot of really granular level stuff. And then, and so what's really kind of crazy is that this stuff all right here that is the headers is still in the body of the packet. And the packet, like the packet body, contains the headers and the body for an actual for the actual HTTP request that's being made or response.
It's like it's enfolded. It's like,
yes,
it's like when you have a file that's in a proprietary format inside of a zip file inside of another thing, or whatever.
So all your lowest level stuff, it knows the packet level, and it handles headers and bodies from that. And then inside of the body, oh, this was an HTML or this was an HTTP request. And so it sent it off to this little engine that handles that stuff. The body is passed, and now it gets broken down into a new headers and body that just came from the body, right?
Right.
And things, and then it goes another further, because now
onion.
Right. Then what happens is that then it might go a little further, because it might go, oh, well, this is an HTML thing that needs to happen here, right? And so now what it does is that the headers, which was this stuff, right? Now what it does is it gets broken down again, where the body is now the head and the body wrapped inside that HTML document, right? Right inside the HTML tag.
Right.
And it now knows how to do that. So it's like a head and a body wrapped inside of an HTML that's in the body of a request or response, or a response in this case. And that's just in the body of the response. The response has a headers and a body, right, that are in the body of a packet, which has its own headers and body.
Right. So it's almost like each level or protocol or language or way of communicating is like wrapped up in another form.
Right. And so we get to the OC model, which is this sucker. So we have the physical layer, we have the data link
I've never understood that. I've come across it so many times, and
right. And so what's happening is that, just think of it like this: at each level, there's protocols in place that basically are for handling this stuff. We don't really get up into the HTML or the actual way of higher level sort of what we're generally working with, until we get to the TCP and the UDP sort of protocols right here at the transport layer.
That's from that level up that I've only interacted pretty much. Like, right. I don't understand anything lower than that.
Yep. Usually. This would be the presentation layer, ensures that data is in a usable format and is where data encryption occurs. Application layer, this is generally like where the HTML is actually handled finally.
Okay.
Right. And so there's a whole lot of stuff going on here of layers of protocols working on like on top of each other, or inside, like nested inside, depending. So it's like, one thing may be there's the physical layer that's the transmits the raw bit stream over the physical medium. There's the data link layer, which defines the format, right? So it's just layers. Just know that. And so in general, a lot of this stuff ends up having headers and bodies, because effectively you need metadata that tells you about what's in the body.
Right.
And it also tell you things like, oh, it's from this, it's from this. And so like hackers, they're not just dealing at the layers of this type of stuff, this request response. They're dealing down in here into the headers and the bodies.
Because really what you're dealing with is structured data. So there's got to be some metadata in the headers to define the structure.
Right. So when you're doing like an actual like VPN, where you're going through a proxy and things like that, that's to obfuscate some of that stuff. And so the idea is that your direct thing gets pulled out of these lower header levels, the lower levels in the headers in the lower levels. And now and it'll replace it with something else. And so now you got a proxy that's sort of protecting your data, like your some of the stuff about maybe your machine or whatever. That's the general idea of why VPNs are popular.
Right. Because you trust a VPN more than your ISP.
Right. But you're still going through your ISP.
Right.
So I mean,
point of obfuscation, right? At that,
right,
because it bypasses the lower levels.
Okay. So real quick, because I don't know how much time we have left, I'll keep going. I want to keep going until you really fully understand this. So we'll walk this through until you really have gotten the fullness of it, because we're also covering a lot of other things that I know are interest to you, right?
Oh yeah.
So Anyway, so just know that that's kind of what's happening there. Now what we're going to do is with this post request, we are going to create a body. So it's just a tab here. Okay. Now this is a none, which means there's no body. We could do some form data here. So we could make it look like a form that was coming from a thing. We could do a form URL encoded type of thing. We could go raw. We could go straight binary. There's a GraphQL interface. We're going to go raw though, and we're going to specify it as JSON because this is in general how a lot of this stuff is transferred. Okay?
Well, so API to API would be JSON.
Right. Well, and also a lot of forms now, a lot of forms in the modern way of doing things, they're sending it across as JSON.
JSON, okay.
Okay, even when it's from a web form,
It's
because React and Vue will literally just send JSON data, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, so now what I could do is I can come in here and I could say name, and I can go Eric, right? And I could go, let's see here. Well, we'll just go description, dork, right? Something like that. Okay. In fact, I'll even go and fully write it out. Okay. So here I'm creating a JSON object with the name and a description, with name and description keys, and I'm setting up two things here, right? Two values. Okay. So now if I send this, then what happens is, oops, come back over to here. Because I actually was spitting it out, notice I just got it back.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So now I have data that came from somewhere else, and now I can handle that data. And I want you to notice that the quotes here are missing around the front side. See this? Name and description.
Okay.
Okay. It's a little bit of a peculiarity because you have to know that here, if I don't put these here, if I try to remove this for some reason,
right.
okay, then what's going to happen is it's not going to let me do it. It's going to give an error. So the stuff that comes has to be like sort of like this, but when it actually finally gets handled by the JSON or whatever, it's going to turn it into a JavaScript object of sorts. Because JSON is JavaScript object notation. And so it's meant as a protocol for transferring stuff. It's also there for saving. So it's like a way of like, let's say you have an object or whatever, but you need to save it into memory. You can also save it into memory using JavaScript object notation. This package.json, this is literally just a JSON object. See that? It's the same thing happening here, just in our package.json. Okay. It's a JavaScript object, and then inside of it, it's got some key value pairs here. This one is a key value pair where the value is another object with two key value pairs inside of it. This one is a nut. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it just kind of keeps going.
It's still folded just like our layers.
Yeah. So literally when we were configuring stuff with our package.json, we were already using JSON. So it's a multi-purpose tool. JSON.
Hold on a second here. The thing we did with our post filling the body with name and description, we could have named the key value pairs anything we wanted in the values for them because it's just data. Whereas this package.json has to follow a certain nomenclature because you're actually referring to real things, right?
Yep. Like, and that's where API documentation becomes crucial, because API documentation helps basically people interact with your API correctly. So because you have to handle error. So like if they're not sending in required fields that are essential to like a post request, then you're going to send back a response of an error. You're not going to do anything on the server side. You're going to literally stop at the validation process, kick back an error and say, here's something you need to do because currently you're getting this error.
So, so like, for example, dev dependencies, the second D is capital. And if you had a lowercase, I'm imagining it would break it. It would break nodemon.
If I did what now?
Under our package JSON file,
Yeah,
there's a key called dev dependencies.
correct.
The second
You got it.
The second
Yeah,
D is
it's
capital.
yep, you got it. And these things are all set up within that node sort of framework. And so these are all keys that it's looking for.
Because upper lowercase matters with JavaScript.
Yep.
And so break nodemon is what it would do.
Well, it would break the node wouldn't be able to load it.
Oh, when they never load. Okay. Because
nodemon is literally just there doing a listening on, it's looking at these files, and if changes occur, it's going to reload the server.
It's refreshing
but
it.
node is the thing running it.
Yeah, but nodemon is giving us the ability to automatically have our state refreshed without having to manually do it. Right.
Right.
And so if that little D, if you don't catch that, well, it's spot an error, I'm sure, if you had the wrong thing. Or would it?
It might. I don't know. Let's see. Let me go with the little lowercase d here and see what happens.
Because that would be the
I don't even think it. It still worked, but I think something would break. I think you generally want to keep it like that.
Right.
This really only plays a part when you're first installing your node modules.
Because you wouldn't even really be running nodemon on the production API, right?
Right. You don't want to be doing that on the, yeah. And that's why it's a dev dependency versus a dependency.
Got you.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Right. So this is just a way of basically making it easier for developers to have an automatic redeploy every time they change something.
Right.
Without it actually affecting the production server.
So
anyway.
When you know what those fields are is because you have to understand the docs or the API, like whatever the syntax is. Now, if you auto install it or do whatever packs we did, of course, it's going to populate it with the right things, like it's not going to spell it wrong or something.
Right. Yep. So anyway, so you're right. I mean, having those nice little tools there, they literally like make it so much easier, right? Because then I don't have to come in here and type stuff and find out I typed something wrong.
Right.
Right. So anyway, so just kind of know that that's kind of, we're literally already using JSON. And in fact, I could build configuration files that are particular to my API application that I'm building here. I could pull those in. I could import them.
This is awesome, man. This gives me a lot better, like, because see, this is what I need is more a ground level basic understanding compared to what they're trying to talk to me like I already know what I'm talking about. And even I feel as though there's a lot of times where I feel like, yeah, I know you already explained this before, but I need to go back and review. So you're stretching me a little bit, but this is stuff I can wrap my head around.
Right. Well, this is why I do things the way that I do it, because I try to simplify it, because there's so much. I mean, if you're now having to deal with Docker stuff, you're having to deal with all this database stuff, right? You're dealing with all these things already set up. It's really hard to distill down what is an API.
Yeah, but I'm jumping right back into Docker here in a moment.
Which is fine. But just know that that's kind of what it is. Now there's more to go here. So let's reset. Let's do one more, at least one more, because I want to walk you fully through where the heck all this stuff about an API. We're going to talk about authentication. We're going to talk about query parameters. We're going to really, really cover this so you understand what an API is.
Oh boy. Okay, hold on. Let me exit here. Hey, I got a meeting in a couple hours too. Another Zoom meeting for the.
Okay. Well, we'll get this one done. I'm gonna give me about a 5-minute break because I'm gonna take a smoke. I'm gonna refill my coffee.
And I'd like to do the same, but I want to mention to you, part of the reason I got into my interest with API and block production is because I'm meeting with, they've had a proposal on the books to do blockchain production in international territories and through satellites, so to circumvent legal jurisdictional issues. But I was like, man, I'm sort of curious about because I was like just filled with like latency, because they're having a lot of problems with just there's no way that that are running API services necessary for their products to work are being rewarded or supported. It's a big whack. And so I got really interested in that. And on all this research and stuff that I'm doing is awesome, because when I come to the meeting in a little bit, they'll be really surprised, because I just started getting into this like yesterday. So I was
Cool.
expecting you to give me this lowdown to so much. So I really appreciate it, man. It's awesome. So
Oh yeah, that's why I'm here, man. I tell you, like, that's what I do. Okay, give me 5 minutes,
Awesome.
and then just
Sounds
send
good.
the new one here in 5, and I will be
Sounds
right
good.
on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool.
Bye.
Lots of good progress so far. I think you're starting to understand it a little bit better, right?
Yeah, I just want my hands on your repo now.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we've got this post request, right? So we already saw here that the data is coming across now, right? So now that we have this data that's come from the body, the request body, right? Now we can do stuff with it. I'm going to take these two things, or actually I'll comment out the headers because we don't really need to see it. Okay. And I'm just going to keep this simple for now. So just know that realistically, now that we have the data from the request body, we can do something with it. That was literally Copilot just working for me. Did you see that?
Yeah. So on my list of to-dos, install Copilot and Postman.
Yep. So anyway, yeah, in this case, we can just send back the data, but realistically, we're not even going to do that. What we'll, when we have this data now, what we could do is we could call a different function that's literally going to handle, because you generally don't want to do it inside of here. You want to have something else that's going to like actually work with your data service, your data services layer. And that is like where you would go and you'd store this. Now you could now take this data and and this is another thing. So so functions, right? Functions, there's 2 formulas to know. So 2 formulas to know, right? How much Doug is worth? What the heck? Okay.
Nice. I love it.
Anyway,
Copilot.
the first,
Copilot's
I know,
got a sense of humor.
Dude, Copilot is insane. It's actually quite fun. So the first formula is IAO, which is equal to input, action, output. Okay, which is really functions, right? Functions. Functions take in out inputs, do an action, and return output.
Okay.
That's what functions do. Okay. But inside of the action, so A, or the action, right, has another formula, has VCF or VPF, however you want to think of it, right? So what that means is it's a validate, and then it's calculate, process, right? Something like that, calculator process. And then it is, the third thing is format. So we have input, action, output. And then we have inside of the action, we generally want to think in terms of what we need to validate, what we need to do, and what we need to format when we go to return the output. So the first thing we do is we validate the input as part of the action. So that's where we would take and make sure that this data is not trying to do some injection attacks on us, We would make sure that the data is in the correct format of what we're looking for so that we can do the process correctly. Otherwise, we're going to return an error to the user and say, hey, you're going to need to do this with this API endpoint. Make sense?
Yeah, so basically the structure of how you want the data and the error messages that we pass all have to be based on our intelligent design. It's not going to just do it for us, obviously.
Right. And our validation needs to follow that.
Right. So now is this,
and then
is
our
this,
formatting is that we want to create a standardized format for all of our outputs that come from our API so that way it's not too messy.
so now for some reason, the words big O notation and design and object patterns are coming to mind again. Is that, did I remember those right?
Yeah, those are kind of peripherally involved, but this is a little bit now higher level. Right. So this is really where we get into some of the other stuff. We've gone beyond the original 4 things and then the 2 additional, because the original 4 things, of course, were like commands and then variables and then your conditionals and your functions. And then we got into sort of objects and design patterns and data structures and algorithms. So we got those 2 down. Now we're getting into actual networking.
Okay.
Right. And really, in truth, this right here, IAO, that is the base formula of the universe.
So when you say IAO, this is a conceptual acronym. It's not something that you have a .IAO file or anything like that.
Right. This is a conceptual thing. And here's where I actually took it from. IAO, hermetic. So this formula is the principal and most characteristic formula of Osiris of the redemption of mankind. I is Isis, nature, ruined by Apophis, the destroyer, and restored to life by the redeemer Osiris.
I love it. I love it.
Okay.
I love it. How did that happen?
How did what happen?
Well, IAO, the multi-dimensional like input, action, output in Isis, Apophis, and Osiris. It's just lovely.
Right. And what's really happening here is Isis is the original input that is destroyed by this action, and then is redone and restored as Osiris, formatted data.
Therefore, you're a tarot programmer.
Right. Right. I mean, in other words, this is kind of why I tied all this stuff together, because when I started really studying IAO, what I saw was input, action, output.
It's an organic process we're describing through mythology as well as programming language.
Boom. And that is exactly why I feel like what everybody used to build into story form, which this is a story. The Osiris, so it's like Isis, nature, right? Ruined by Apophis, and then redeemed by Osiris, right? That's a story. That's archetypes, that's characters, and that's basically now a story. That's a narrative. Okay. And so all of the old storytellers, that's why like in John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, because the Word was predominantly how the storytellers really sort of connected all of this stuff, because they were thinking in a creative way, and they were like, effectively, it's like God spoke a story into existence. But once we got to programming, once we got to code, we actually now have the way in which God does it at an engineering level.
Yeah, and then and that reminds me of the thing that you showed me about when we started talking about DNA being a repository and what algorithm sequences. I forgot what it was now. Oh man.
Right. So that's why I say programming is so fundamental to really spiritual practice. because it really is that fundamental. It's like when people are talking about in spiritual sort of ways, they're going to be talking in a storyteller form. They might be using artwork, they may be using music to do these types of things, but they're literally sort of building narratives, and then they're going to be using the vibrational structure or, you know, of music or something along those lines, but they're really thinking in that way. But but with code, we're actually being given a tool that is now relevant to where we are in this actual story.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's helping, but it's also deconstructing us, and it's causing a lot of real conundrums and pickles within reality for all people, because we're being deconstructed to the core. Code is deconstructing us. And that's why with AI, it's really damaging to people. And why so many people are afraid of it is because it's literally deconstructing us. It's like we're finding out that we're just as material. Our whole thing of consciousness, our whole thing of whatever, we're literally we're already in the process of proving that every little thing we think is so divine in some sort of mystical sense is still divine. I still think of it as divine, but it is material in that most philosophical way. The way that the materialists of philosophy talk. Mm-hmm. So it's still wow to me, but it's wow because we literally are deconstructing every little thing that we are functionally, and we're able to actually reflect that into AI. And so all of it can be built out.
All right, so let's get back to the API
cool.
stuff.
Hopefully that was an interesting little excursion.
Oh yeah, no, it is.
Okay.
I'm just trying to. I'm looking at my time because I need some time to
prepare for this. I gotcha. So anyway, within IAO, okay, so when you're thinking about this, and this is true for all functions, man. This is true of all functions. It's not just API endpoint. And by the way, notice an API endpoint is literally a URL, or and we're talking a REST API here. So a REST API is a very particular type of application programming interface. So that's where we get these gets and these posts. This is all part of REST nomenclature. Right. Okay, but effectively, how we're handling it is a function. It's all that's happening. And so it's really just saying, okay, this was the route that was called at the networking side. Where is the function that handles that? And so we create this function here, and now we have access to a request and response that's built into the Express framework or whatever framework we're using for this sort of REST API stuff. And now we're off and running, and all we have to do is define it within a function. We just are going to literally handle the A portion, and this request is literally part of the input, and this is part of the output.
Mm-hmm. It seems pretty straightforward because in that one, the request is the first thing that happens, and the data field is defined by whatever, I guess we're slapping in the body field of Postman at this moment. And then all the console log thing is saying is display that data in the console log, which is what we see here as in a development environment, but that would not display that same thing on a, like, because that's not a response. So the response is the 200 with the hello Doug and the hello Eric, which is a JSON format with, let's see, now this is I'm a little confused by the hello Doug thing. JSON, when you just type in the square bracket, now we are creating an array, I guess, which hello Doug is the first value of the array. Then the second value of the array is a function.
Yeah, is an object.
Is an object.
And objects are just key value pairs.
Objects are just key value pairs. Okay.
And really there could be more than one. In this case, we have just one here, but we can set it up to where it has multiple key value pairs.
So, but the hello Doug and the hello Eric, although they both say just hello and someone else's name, are fundamentally different because the hello Doug is part of an array and the hello Eric is a key value pair, but it's being treated as a item or in the array, I guess.
Well, right. So this is the 0 of this array. And this is or I should say, this is the first element found at 0. And this is the second element found at 1.
Okay. And the second element found at 1 is
in this case is an object.
Well, yeah. And in this case, the object, but the thing that says message, what does that exactly mean? And how does it make it different than the first value or
that is the key. So an object is a set of key value pairs.
Right. So that's
this is a key called message.
And the value
message value is hello, Eric.
But is hello, Doug considered a value of a key? It's not, I guess.
It's just a simple string.
It's a string. Okay.
Right. And to further elucidate that, let me add another thing here. So let me go and say, let me give you the number 3. Okay.
Oh gosh.
So now when I save it,
these are different types of things in an array, which I didn't know you could do or not.
Yep. And so now when I do it, I get back 3 elements. This one is a string. This one is a integer or a number. And this one is an object with a key value pair of message equals hello, Eric.
Okay. And this is all in an undefined array. Like this array.
Yep, exactly. And the whole key about this right here is this becomes iterable. So that means that I can loop over this and do stuff with it. In general, you don't see this type of an array where you have this type of mixed structure to this level, because what really generally happens is that you'll just see something like this. You'll see message 1, right? And then you'll see a different one, which is a different sort of thing, which is actually you'll just do another message here.
So you'll go. So this is an array of key value pairs, and they're all consistently key value pairs of the same type because they're all messages.
Yep. And so what happens is that you end up with, that was where my co-pilot kind of did a little bit too much. It just did a little bit more than it should have. But anyway, so now I've got this still standing. It only did this because I've got Prettier installed. And so it tries to keep everything within 80. This ran over, but it doesn't know how to handle comments. So it just ignores it. Okay. So anyway, so this response is still doing this dot status. And then it's also, and this is called chaining functions. Function chaining. So it's setting this to status, and then it's also setting JSON to the response object, to this response object right here. But anyway, so now when I come back over here, I'm going to get much more uniform. Did I save that? Yep. When I send it, I'm going to get back a uniform structure.
Okay.
And what makes this very useful is, like, let's say you've got a social media feed. And so you'll get back a list of posts, for instance, and each post is its own object in this array. And you start iterating over it, and you just start populating the posts, and all of the posts have the exact same key value, like the same keys, but the values are different.
Right.
And so now a front end user can know how to easily sort of display all of the posts just by iterating over it.
Okay, and now in this example on line 3 is the first item in the array which is did you call that 0 or 1 in the array?
Well, actually, right. So in the array, this is what is known as the first element.
Okay. First
But
element.
depending upon the language that you're dealing with, most languages start at array 0.
Okay, got you, got you. It depends on the language. And in JavaScript, is it considered 0 or 1? Is this
And 0.
0? Okay.
And so, like, for instance, I could even come up here and I could go and I could pass in a JavaScript array here, right? Like this is now coming from the body. So this is that body that we had, right?
Okay.
Oops, I don't want to do that. So so this is that body. So let me come up in here and I'm going to go name, and I'll go Doug, and I'll do this, and I'll go, oops, description. I'll go wizard, right? And so when I'm doing this, and I probably want to structure this so that it's easier for you to see it. There we go. So now I'm passing in an array first. Why is that giving me, oh, is it just a colon expected? What do you mean? Oh, it's because of this was missing. See, you gotta make sure you always have your end quotes. Okay, so now when I go and I send this, and I come back over here, see how I got both of these back?
Yeah.
And it's inside of an array.
Right.
Okay, so guess what that means I can do? That means I can actually go and I can show these individually. I can go console, log, data, and then what's at 1. Okay, so now when I make the call, I get back just the 2 objects. I don't have it wrapped in the array anymore because I'm not printing the array. I'm printing element 0 or element
Awesome.
1 at 0.
See, that's exactly what I wanted to know, because so you can reference the item in the array by its number, even though the number is not listed, it's implied.
Right. Now, what's great about this is that once I've got access to these objects like this, now, as long as I don't mess up here where name's not actually there, that's part of validation stuff, right? I can now say, and now I'm just getting the names back.
Oh, gotcha.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So so you standardize stuff into an array, and then you can just literally like,
Okay, see, this is interesting. So in the first example, we have the whole array returned with the key value pairs inside it, which were those objects. Whereas in the second example, we did not return the array, we just returned the 2 objects or key value pairs.
Yep.
And then in the last example, we only returned the value of the key name but we did it for 0 and then we did it for 1.
Right. Now in here, I'm going to show you, I'm doing a for loop over the data. So instead of going and actually calling each one individually, because I don't know how many there are,
Right.
I'm going to set up an iterator at 0, and then I'm going to go to the length of the data. So I'm going to go to, as long as I is less than the data length. And I'm even going to show you here that console log, if I go data.length, then what it's going to show is it's going to show 2. That's what's going to print there, because we got 2 elements. Okay. And so what happens is the first time I is 0, right? And I is less than the data length because it's 2. So 0 is less than 2. And then after I get done, I'm going to increment it, right? And now I'm going to just print out whatever is at I.
Right.
Okay. And so then the second time through, I is equal to 1, still less than 2. It's going to do its thing. By the time it gets back up again, it's 2 is not less than 2. And so now it'll exit the for loop.
Okay.
Okay. So what happens is when I make the call, I get essentially the same effect of having done this, but now it's this style.
Well, hold on a
And
second.
now what I've done is no matter how many data things I'm passing in, right? No matter how many data elements are there, that for loop will handle it.
Question for you. Why that for statement, given the example of I being 0, is 0 minus 0. So if I is less than data length, which is 2, so 0 is less than 2, does it increment it automatically? Because if it does, then would it not console log 0?
This third thing is, this was the data length and it was console logged up here. So it gave the 2. I was giving the length.
No. But what I'm saying is in this example, it should print out my name because I'm in array 0, value 0. And if console log data I is printing out the data of the console log, if I is already incremented, it's not going to print out 0.
Right. This happens after this little thing that's a pretty common little standard here, the for loop. This came from C syntax structure. This happens after, this happens when it gets to here.
Oh, got you. Right. That makes perfect sense.
So the first time, in fact, what you'll even see here, I can console log I, and I'll even do it after my little action here that's happening. Oops, that did not take the way I wanted it to. Console log I.
And it'll still be 0 at both those.
Right, on both sides. So of course I have to come over here and call it, run it. But what you'll notice here is that I get a 0, and then I get the actual object, and then I get a 0, and then it goes up to the top of the loop again, and it does its thing.
All right. See, that makes perfect sense to me now. Thank you for explaining that.
So anyway, so that's just, so in general, this is more how you do it, but you can have like a variety of stuff. And so a pretty common thing in here is that effectively you'll have kind of a, maybe like an array of like objects or whatever. Well, actually in general, what'll happen is you'll have an object that inside of it has some little key value pairs that are kind of almost acting as headers. And then you'll have like literally one little key, you'll have one key value that is set to the data of a list, right? The data is a list, and that's where you'll put all like the posts or something like that, right? And so you can do an array as the outer, or you can do an object as the outer, but you have to have one of those two. You can't just pass like a simple string. Like I can't do raw JSON and technically have, see here, I can't just do like blah, right? If I try to do that, I should get an error back, which I did.
Okay. So, yeah. So is there a standardized way of how those headers and key value pairs define how data is transmitted? Like, or does everyone just do their own custom way of doing things, or?
Well, and that's the thing. Every API ends up with kind of its own structure. And so that's part of the documentation of the API.
All right, that's what I was wondering.
And that's where you start to get into some of these things where like that one article you sent me about making sure you really structure your API well to begin with, because at a certain point it becomes legacy, people are using it, and then you go to change your API in some real big way where the inputs and the outputs are shifted ever so slightly. And now you got an issue because you've got people using it. And so that's where you end up getting into API versioning.
Oh, and so you have to like support multiple versions as long as you
right. And then you can even say like, hey, you know, right now we're going to have this, but here's the version 2 stuff, or here's the version 3.7.4. And And eventually we're going to, consider all of that older stuff deprecated. And so at some point, we're going to stop supporting that older version. So make sure you get all your stuff set up onto the newer version. But, we're going to give you time to build that out. So we left the legacy and the legacy version intact. And eventually we're going to just switch that off and you'll have to use the new version, but you're going to have some time to work on it. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. But in general, it still becomes a headache. And so that's why that one article was saying, kind of make sure your API is structured pretty well to begin with. Right.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
so
another question.
The last little bit here that I want to cover, because I just want to cover
Sure,
a couple of things.
Sure.
Okay. So the first thing is that we already have seen that this is kind of how this stuff works. And I'll make sure I package all this stuff together in a way to where you have access to all these links. And so you can remember what we were talking about.
Well, you know what's funny is I never heard the acronym CRUD, but I kept coming across these 5 things: post, get, put, patch, delete. But CRUD makes it so much easier for me to remember, understand for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Just conceptually. I mean, I've heard get request, put, post request.
Right. And this was because this was the database style. CRUD comes from database.
Ah, interesting.
And so then there's the HTTP verb style to it, right? And it even says here that these are generally the status codes that you'll want to return for each of these.
Okay.
For like an entire collection or whatever. These are the, this is like a specific item. These are all like your okays, but then some of them are like errors if you don't want to allow it, certain things. And notice this put, some people use put, and a lot of people will use put in the way that patch is used. And so just kind of be aware that the general idea was put is now meant for sort of replacing the full data at that sort of thing. So it's either the full row or the full, MongoDB document, something like that, right? And it's going to replace the whole thing. And a patch would be modifying an already existing version, but not changing but not a full replacement. Okay. Very just kind of you'll see a lot of stuff there. We can talk about that more later. Okay, but now we can go into the full list of HTTP verbs. So I just want to show you really quick here that, oh man, let's see here. Let's go Wiki. Does Wiki still have it? Does it still have all of them? Does it have them? Yeah, so here's verbs. So there's even more. Head is like used if you just want to make sure that this is how you can get headers, but not anything else related to that endpoint.
Interesting.
And so this kind of explains them. I think there's even more there, but that's pretty much it right there. Yeah. So I'll make sure that that's linked. And so you got access to that. Now then that's the verb. So that's coming in from the request. It's what style of request. And then what you have to do is you have to go response codes. So there's requests, there's the requests, and then there's the response codes. Here's a whole list of response codes. So in general, this is your 100s are informational. Your 200s are usually representative of some form of success. That's why you get like 201 return for a post, which is creating an object. And for updating, you might go to like a 200 OK, or for a get, it's a 200 OK. This is stuff where you're going to redirect. So you're going to say, hey, it's no longer here, go here. And you'll kind of give the redirect URL.
How does it work when your API server is overloaded? Can you cluster or mirror? How does that work? Load balance?
Yeah. That's in fact what you want to do. That's part of the scalability aspect. Then you get client errors. So these are things like a bad request. That's where like the data that the person put into or that the code had for the body that was coming in from a request, it wasn't the right sort of whatever. So you can go 400 bad request. So then the front end user, the front end coder can handle for a 400 bad request and display the right error messages, things like that. You can get not found. So like if a resource
I know
doesn't
that one.
exist.
I know that one.
Yep. So there's different 400 codes, and then there's server errors, like internal server error,
I've
bad
seen that one.
gateway, right?
I've
So
seen
these are the actual codes. Okay, that's the next that. So I'm just going to wrap some of this stuff up because I know you got to go, and so I'll make sure that this stuff all gets to you. Okay, so then the final two things I want to cover are authentication and the query parameters. Okay, so the whole thing with authentication is that in general, what you will do is you will set up an endpoint. Usually it'll be its own sort of router here, like within the actual API. And what it'll be is it'll be a whole subset of like a whole router that just is set to whatever your URL is /auth.
Okay.
Right. And so you'll have like your HTTP yada yada /API/auth. And now what you can do is you can actually have people log in using that. Right. So that would be passing in through HTTPS. Hopefully you'd be using that
Yeah,
for
that was the other
username
thing.
and password in the body.
How much of the data is transferred through HTTP versus HTTPS?
Well, we won't get into that right now because that's I need to stay on point here for 3 minutes left.
Sorry.
No
Yeah,
worries. So anyway, so the body might send, you'll do a post request that's literally just, like here's the username and the password, and it'll go and it'll verify it. And if it's verified, the response will return an authentication token or a cookie or something like that. Right. Okay. And now you've created an actual sort of way of authenticating, and then you protect all your other routes and you require authentication to use them.
And so do you authenticate first, I guess?
Yes.
Okay.
When you are not doing a public API where you just want anybody to have access, if you're going to do a public API, you better only use gets.
Gotcha.
Because you don't want to be doing posts.
Man, that'd be crazy.
Right. And so anyway, so that's all how authentication just works. It's literally just a thing of an API endpoint where you authenticate the user. Some of them are a little bit more complex than others, some styles. And then you're going to return an auth token, a session token, a JWT token.
All that stuff is built into the JavaScript libraries for Node. JS, yes. And you just call up the commands, and it's pretty cookie cutter template type. You don't have to.
Yeah, and it can get kind of complex too. Like a very popular one is called passport.js, which allows you to do a lot of different styles of authentication, and yet it unifies the authentication structure. It's kind of a cool little thing.
So I guess the interesting thing for me in relation to the OS community is one of the things I know that they do is they want a tokenized version of authentication, right? So they're using Node.js or Node OS. So it just seems to me like it would just be a different kind of packaged thing, that I don't know. There should be some libraries out there that you could pull in or whatever.
Yep. So then totally. There's libraries. And that's all going to be built into that like Docker thing that guy sent you.
But so going back to Python, if they don't
hold on 1 second. So then the next thing that I want to do, the next thing I want to cover real quick is query parameters.
Okay.
So you remember over here how we were talking about query parameters? Right here, query params, and they get added as a question mark and all of that up here.
Yep.
The reason why you do that is that's like for like you're returning a list, you can specify a sort order, and then the URL will, like when you go hit that endpoint with that sort order, ascending, descending, whatever, you can get it in that order. The server will return it in that order.
Well, it's like she's in a simple search query. I see that kind of similar kind of thing.
Pagination works the exact same way. It's through those query parameters.
Okay.
So anyway, so just know query parameters are there to kind of like help a user say, here's how I want the data when it's returned. Specific. The last thing I will say, hopefully before it cuts off, is that now that we have the data, this is how we now can start using, we can now store it into like MongoDB, Postgres, whatever.
Wow.
And that's it.
All
That's
right,
how an
man.
API works.
Dude, that's crazy. I didn't realize we were going to cover that much stuff.